Welcome back to a fresh episode of the College Football Insiders. I am your host, Richard Johnson, joined by my guy, Chris Hummer. All right, Chris, let's start with the job that is still open, and we really don't have a ton of clarity on it, but we can talk about what we know about the currently open Michigan coaching job that's in a very odd spot. I guess we should start with the coach who is actually going to be coaching Michigan in the Cheez-It Bowl later on in bowl season. If it's Biff Poggi, who has been interim coach at Michigan before, was something of a consigliere to Jim Harbaugh. They went way back, and he came back to this job, to Ann Arbor, after a run as Charlotte's head coach. He will be the coach on the sideline for that game. But the question is, Chris, will he be the head coach on the sideline for farther than that? Now, it's our understanding, the two of us, that he's told the team and recruits that he at least wants the job and is posturing himself for the job. Just before we kind of get to sort of the machinations and the nuts and bolts of this Michigan search, just what do you think about that in general? Potentially Biff Poggi being the head coach, maybe as a bridge option or a long-term full-time option?
Well, I think the bridge option is the only way that really makes sense. If Michigan wants to do a Stanford essentially and sit out the coaching cycle because they were so late and then conduct their coaching search over the next year. When they get their athletic department in order, I think the athletic director still is kind of an open question in Michigan as well to his future. So there's a lot of kind of stuff hanging up in the air with Michigan. And if you wanted to go that bridge route, Biff Poggi would make a lot of sense. I've heard some complimentary things about how Biff Poggi's handled things in the wake of Sharon Moore's absence. We've reported at CBS before that the money dried up a little bit when people started hearing rumors about the Sharon Moore stuff. Boosters stopped giving what they were to the point where I think Michigan was almost going to be in trouble in terms of making its payments. Biff Poggi's rallied the boosters around that. That's no longer an issue. He is somebody really respected in that space. In some ways, like Biff is a guy that I could see like maybe being an AD in the future with his connections in the business world and everything about that and his ability to raise money. But he definitely would like a chance at the Michigan job. I think he may have even interviewed earlier in this week talking to a couple of people. So this is somebody that has been given some consideration, but just rationally and just talking to people in the industry as well, I can't see him being the long-term answer at Michigan. It's just not a hire given how that went at Charlotte. That makes a lot of sense on paper.
Long term, if Biff Poggi were to be the AD at Michigan, as Chris is musing about, I do wonder if the suit he would wear to events would be cut off. I guess we'd have to see if that is how he'd play it. Brandon Marcello joins the show. Welcome, Brandon, my guy. We're talking about Biff Poggi and the Michigan job and the current status of the job. Now, we've reported, CBSSports.com, all three of us, frankly, about the fact that Michigan has this internal investigation into the athletic department that puts out, frankly, kind of a cloud over the job and a little bit of uncertainty. And it's my opinion that into that uncertainty, Biff Poggi's candidacy has kind of risen, similar to how Terry Smith's candidacy kind of rose during the Penn State coaching search when you weren't really hearing about the search. Brandon, what do you think about Biff Poggi as a potential bridge option here for Michigan?
I think it would certainly be entertaining next year if that was the case. And it would certainly garner a lot of attention. But I think when you talk about trying to keep one, recruiting classes together, then also provide as that bridge option, as you guys discussed, it makes a lot of sense. But, let's also remember that, Michigan has hired a search firm, so they are going through the process of at least looking into the potential of hiring a big name coach out there. Now, they got to see if there's any interest on their part over the next week or two before they kind of make a decision there, obviously, whether to continue down that route. But if they don't get a lot of nibbles here over the next week or so, I think Biff Poggi is something that will certainly kind of garner more interest and start to percolate more toward the surface. But, there are plenty of really, really good coaches out there and some named coaches that'll listen to Michigan should they show serious interest. But the big question, though, is, of course, do they believe that, Ward Manuel will be their boss in the future at the athletics director? Because as you mentioned, with this internal investigation going on, there's questions about whether he might stay on there. But, as one of the sources told me there at Michigan, that Ward Manuel's their AD right now, and he's continuing with the search. This is his search right now. So I wonder how Ward Manuel is communicating that to potential candidates and the actual candidates he wants to interview.
Yeah, Brandon, that to me just creates such an uncertain dynamic around this job. If at any point in time, not just the AD, but potentially other people in the athletic department could face discipline because of an internal investigation, in which case we don't know the scope of, we don't know the findings, we don't know the discipline structure, we don't know anything about it. So if you're going to take this Michigan job, you better be very, very certain about what's going to happen here with the future of this athletic department, or the rug could be pulled out from under you administratively. Michigan also does not have a permanent school president. That is also something to come. And so maybe the bridge coach thing works, but you also have to wonder, are you literally punting a season of Bryce Underwood? Because you're not going to have a ton of those if you're Michigan, this absolute phenom quarterback that you have. There's a lot to weigh right now with the dynamic at Michigan. Brandon, I'll go right back to you. As far as Kenny Dillingham is concerned, that was a name that was bubbling last weekend as far as a potential target for Michigan's search. I know that you have some sourcing around Dillingham's candidacy for Michigan and what's going on with him at Arizona State, and you kind of fill the viewers in on that.
Yeah, so the day after the regular season ended at Arizona State said, here's a new contract extension and idea of what we want to go with. And so Kenny Dillingham's camp took that, from my understanding, and made some other requests of some other changes they want to see, and also some things they want added to it. And so then last week, Arizona State got back with them and gave them kind of what you would call maybe a second draft of what that contract would look like. And my understanding is that Kenny Dillingham's team looked at it and said, not much has changed here. It's not quite exactly what we were asking for. And so Kenny Dillingham is someone who, obviously, as you guys know his background, that's his alma mater, Arizona State. He wants to stay there. That's his dream job, has always been. But considering what's going on with his contract negotiations right now, especially when we talk about the resources, this isn't about salary. Kenny Dillingham's salary is going to be just fine wherever he goes, but it's about the resources and the commitments to the football program to put it in position to continue to contend for championships in the new look Big 12. Well, Michigan, we all know that they've got the resources there intact to be able to win a championship. So there hasn't been serious contact yet from Michigan to Kenny Dillingham's camp. But if that were to come before Arizona State shows some type of commitment that makes Kenny Dillingham and his camp happy as far as resources, I'm told that Kenny Dillingham would listen to Michigan's pitch and maybe be interested in that job. But again, the question is Michigan going to show that serious interest and do so maybe in a tight time frame here? Because, as you said, there's just so many moving pieces here. But when we talk about Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham, that window's probably even tighter, because Arizona State's going to want an answer about its contract and signing Kenny Dillingham to an extension here in the very near future.
Yeah, and there's also obviously Kalen DeBoer, whose team is in the college football playoff. They play Friday night against Oklahoma. Excuse me. DeBoer has sort of said the right things, right, over the last few days. Put out a statement on Sunday, then spoke to the media on Monday. Was asked pretty point blank, will you be the head coach of Alabama next season? He said, yes, I'm planning to. So saying the right things. We'll see what happens, especially if the Tide lose in the first round. It seems like it's a consistent hot seat at Alabama, despite the good run that they had in October. It seems like that fan base is just consistently at his neck about the fact that, he's not Nick Saban, which, Chris, no one was going to be Nick Saban who's going to step into that job.
No doubt. And I think from a Michigan perspective, until you see a contract extension announced for Kalen DeBoer and pen to paper, those conversations around Kalen DeBoer are going to persist. I think he is the guy that administration would really like to take a swing at. He is a guy, as a Midwest guy initially, like seems to be a very good cultural fit for Michigan. He's a guy that I think would calm any questions down about Bryce Underwood's future, given his quarterback development. Like on paper, Kalen DeBoer makes all the sense in the world. And he has said the right things publicly, and he is balancing a playoff game upcoming. But until you see an announcement from Alabama saying like, hey, like he has signed this extension, I think a small crack is going to sit there if you're Michigan kind of hopeful and you're thinking you have a chance at that until the contract extension's announced.
Yeah, and then there's also somebody like Jed Fish, who has ties to Michigan, who, and this is just my opinion, I think would certainly want the Michigan job if offered, but we'll see if he actually has a candidacy, so to speak. And then there's NFL guys. There's all type of NFL guys, but you talk about a Jesse Minter who may have a shot at an NFL head job, quite frankly, and also has a show cause that lasts through April that we do have to mention now. Obviously, a show cause means you have to show cause. So if Michigan wanted to hire Jesse Minter, potentially they would have to show cause, and then the NCAA would rule whether they could hire him or not. So just some uncertain dynamics here about the Michigan stuff. And when we talk about an external candidate from the NFL, you're going to run into candidates that have ties to Jim Harbaugh. And Chris, overall, and this is just my opinion, you got to get as far away from Jim Harbaugh as possible with the future of this football program. It seemed like, yes, banners fly forever. The national championship was awesome. Nobody can take that away. But if you really want to move forward as an athletic department, you have to get your football program to put the Harbaugh era aside and go into a new day, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know that era produced the national championship, but I'm sure if you're a Michigan administrator, you're wondering, like, do people really have it better than us, right? Just because of all the scandal that's come from the Jim Harbaugh era of Michigan football. And I think there's even a realization for some people in that building that, like, it's pretty likely that the administration chooses to turn the page and to move on. Just it's been thing after thing after thing for Jim Harbaugh. And I know this is not Jim Harbaugh's issue right now, and it's probably unfair to link him to this situation because this was of a much more problematic nature than anything that occurred on the football field or around the football field under Jim Harbaugh. But it is the continuation of that. And I think for a school that prides itself on the Michigan way and of kind of doing things with an ethical standard that's different than the other contenders, like this era has been a bit of a stain on that reputation. And if you're the administrators of Michigan football and you want to kind of course correct, like it would make sense to move away. Is that a guarantee it'll happen? No, but I do even think like people in that building on that staff have a sense it's very possible like this is the end of that era of Michigan football. And like it was a good one in some ways for Michigan, but at the same time, like Michigan's dealt with more scandals than any other team in college football the last like 10 years. And that's just a really weird thing to say when you're talking about Michigan.
I'll just say an
Absolutely.
educated guess here is that we're going to get probably some type of clarity on whether they're actually going to get a permanent head coach early next week, because that's when this first round, obviously the playoff will be over. There'll be some time for Kalen DeBoer to go back home, maybe think some things over, and Michigan to also decide whether they want to pursue Kalen DeBoer or maybe even go elsewhere with a Kenny Dillingham or a Jed Fish, as you mentioned, or even in the NFL. I know that sounds like a tight timeline, but when you really think about it, considering that it's been about 10 days at that point, you should have an idea of whether you want to pursue someone. And that's when you start hearing that. And so I think that right now, that's probably why we're not hearing anything. They're going to wait until this first playoff window ends. And then if we start hearing murmurs, then we'll see whether Michigan's actually serious about actually hiring a full-time coach or keeping Biff Poggi there as the interim.
When we come back on the College Football Insiders, we're going to move on to quarterback rankings and a transfer portal that is heating up. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. All right, Chris, let's talk transfer portal quarterbacks and where things stand. Portal opens officially on January 2nd, but that does not mean that we don't have movement and intentions to enter. Let's start at Cincinnati with Brendan Sorsby, who frankly had a really good end to his season after a little bit of a rocky start. Intention to enter the portal there. And we're going to see what happens with Sorsby, who's a really, really intriguing prospect. But I think that my question for you, Chris, is Sorsby at the front of the line as far as these quarterback prospects go?
I think it's kind of eye of the beholder, right? Everybody's going to view quarterbacks slightly differently. My guy, Cooper Patagno over at 24/7 Sports, who heads our 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings, has Sorsby as our top guy. And I mean, NFL scouts seem to agree. Had Sorsby left this year, I think he had a legitimate chance to be a day two guy as early as like early day two, so in the second round. So This is a guy with all the talent in the world. He's 6'3", 235. He's big. He moves well. He's got a huge arm. So this is a guy a lot of teams would love to have kind of in front of them. And I think if you put him somewhere else besides Cincinnati, and he had a really good year at Cincinnati, but if you get him in a different offensive system, I think he's capable of even more. Two teams on my end to watch out for him, at least so far, Indiana, which is a little ironic given that that's where he came from. He was with Kurt Signetti for about a week before entering the portal, but I think that's a real option for him the second time around. And Texas Tech's another school to keep an eye on. This is a Denton, Texas kid. That's about 4 hours away from Lubbock. Not very close, but close enough. And I think Texas Tech's going to be very aggressive in its pursuit of Sorsby as their successor there, especially with Will Hammond's injury. So those are two teams I'm watching closely. And I really do think Brendan Sorsby is a guy who this time next year we could be talking about as a potential first round pick because of the stock improvement he made as a senior.
Yeah, let's talk about kind of the Texas Tech and Indiana thing right now. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza expected to go to the NFL draft, expected to be picked quite high in the NFL draft, we would expect. And then there's the Texas Tech of it all. And I think we lock those two teams together because I do think those two are kind of going to be the biggest upper echelon swingers for quarterbacks in the transfer portal when that opens here in January. Like I think for Texas Tech, you mentioned Will Hammond's injury. So if he's got an injury, you're looking to probably a bridge quarterback option to either get to Hammond or continue on, compete with Hammond, and then way further down the road, you wonder if Kavion Bryant is the guy for them moving forward for Texas Tech. And then Indiana, it's funny because they keep doing this short-term kind of rental deal at quarterback, whereas like a team with Miami has had, varying degrees of success around that. Indiana's been able to make it work 2 years in a row to great success, and you would expect a run in this year's college football playoff. And when we talk about Indiana, it's not just Sorsby that we're linking to Indiana. The big one, and probably the highest ranked quarterback in my opinion, is North Texas's Drew Mestemaker. Now, obviously, you probably expect him to end up at Oklahoma State in the end, but it's my understanding that Indiana is going to take a crack at him as well, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you talked about the bridge quarterbacks, right? So Indiana's had two of those in a row. But the beautiful thing about Drew Mestemaker is he has multiple years of eligibility left. He did all this season as a redshirt freshman. Like he could play 3 more years of college football if he wanted to. Given his production, do I think that's going to be the result? I do not. But like he is somebody that can play a lot of college football, and he can be somebody you can build your program around for multiple years, which is not something you get out of the portal very often. And it makes him an extremely attractive player. And yeah, I've heard the same about Indiana. I think they do have a significant interest in Drew Mestemaker, and I think he would be a really good fit for their system. But I also think it's going to be difficult to beat out Oklahoma State. I think there is not only a familiarity factor with Eric Morris, Sean Brophy, the quarterback's coach over there, and that staff, but there's also just like a loyalty factor. Like this is I don't think people remember, I don't know if everybody does, but Drew Mestemaker was a walk-on at North Texas. He didn't even play high school quarterback. He was a backup to Deuce Adams, who's currently at Louisville as their backup quarterback in high school at Austin Vandegrift. Like this is a guy who hasn't played a lot of high-level quarterback, even dating back to high school. So Eric Morris and his staff found Drew Mestemaker. They gave him that chance. He obviously thrived with it. He ran with it. But I do think there's a lot tying Drew Mestemaker to that staff at Oklahoma State. It's going to make him difficult to beat. But teams like Indiana are certainly going to make a run.
And with Oklahoma State, I think that Oklahoma State was a team that was not ready to meet the moment of the NIL and rev share era. It's my understanding that they plan to be now that Eric Morris is in the job. To be honest with you, I don't think Eric Morris would have taken this job if he didn't get some of the assurances and some of the commitment from Oklahoma State brass to be competitive with the highest end of the Big 12. And I think he had to have that to build a roster. And you have all those resources, they're going to go to quarterback, even whether you have a relationship with the quarterback or not. If you've got a lot of resources, the quarterback will demand a lot of resources, especially when he's somebody like Drew Mestemaker, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Drew's going to be a lot of resources thrown at him no matter what happens. And I apologize for stealing the hosting chair for a second, Richard, but I'm curious. If you were Drew Mestemaker and you have the option between going to Oklahoma State and staying with the same staff you were, or going a place like Indiana and advancing your career that way, which direction would you choose?
I think I'd take Indiana. I think I'd take Indiana because of the level of competition that I'm going to be exposed to at Indiana versus in the Big 12. Look, the relationship with Eric Morris, obviously, it looms large. And we know that Eric Morris can find, identify, and develop quarterbacks. But I do think that there's going to be some part of NFL scouts that are going to want to see him against the best of the best. That's an Ohio State. That's an Oregon. That's a Michigan. That's a potentially a Penn State if Matt Campbell's able to get that rolling. The competition that he would face in the Big Ten, and potentially in a college football playoff if he were to get there for Indiana, if Indiana was able to run it back 3 years in a row. I actually think I'd take Indiana in that binary, Chris.
Yeah, I certainly see the argument for Indiana. I mean, Indiana has turned two straight quarterbacks into draft picks, including Fernando Mendoza, who's a potential #1 overall pick. But I wouldn't sell Eric Morrison, Oklahoma State short. Obviously, the resources there and the competition level is a little lower. Like Oklahoma State's going to be a little bit of a rebuild. But Eric Morris is somebody who's coached Cam Ward. He coached John Mateer. He's now coached Drew Mestemaker. Like you can go down the line for a long time of really successful Eric Morris quarterbacks. And Eric Morris is somebody who can get you to the league. And sometimes switching systems midstream isn't always the easiest thing to do. Like there's a learning curve there. And I'm not saying Drew Mestemaker isn't capable of that, but uh, if I was him and I'm looking towards potentially going to the draft soon, and he's eligible next year, like I want to stay in the comfortable system. I want to stay in the familiar system. I want to keep my career on as steady of a path as possible. And I'm not saying Indiana doesn't present him a great opportunity, but I don't know. I think sometimes we undersell the importance of familiarity and stability in terms of the NFL draft track process. But it's a fascinating argument either way, and I think Drew Mestemaker's going to have some really intriguing options.
Chris, what do we think about Dylan Raiola? Nebraska's Dylan Raiola intends to enter the portal. Obviously, sort of a lost season towards the end there because of his injuries that he racked up at the end of the season, and he had a season-ending injury, I should say. What do we think is going to happen with Dylan Raiola? And my question is, what's the market for Dylan Raiola, honestly? Is he still thought of as the highest upper echelon of the quarterback market?
He's thought of somebody with the talent to be in the highest upper echelon of the quarterback market. The production, not necessarily, and also like I'm not trying to lump two quarterbacks together and kind of take the segment somewhere else, but I think what's really interesting about Dylan Raiola and Sam Levitt both is both guys are dealing with a season-ending injury that could potentially keep them out for a little bit. I think it's more serious in Sam Levitt's case, potentially leaving Arizona State. But Dylan Raiola is also dealing with an injury that's going to keep him out for a little bit. He also, frankly, has a little bit of baggage that he's going to have to deal with in terms of like teams dealing with the kind of feedback they're going to get from Nebraska on him. And it makes it difficult. I mean, he is, at the end of the day, a player, I think, who's going to play at his sixth school in 7 seasons of football dating back to high school. So it's a transient nature. And when you have somebody that demands that kind of resources, it makes it difficult for teams to commit in some cases. But Dylan Raiola is still like an ultra talented player. He was very productive for Nebraska this year. Like he is going to have a market. I just don't know if he'll necessarily, and we'll see. Like I have heard his camp is very, very interested in Oregon. I think Dante Moore is probably trending towards leaving to the NFL as of this moment. But I don't know if that's going to be Oregon's first choice or not. Like we'll see. Like he could be, and he could be Oregon's quarterback next year, or like Miami's quarterback or whatever. But like I don't know if Dylan Raiola is a slam dunk top of the market option at quarterback that he would have been this time last year, to be frank. And that's in part because there's some really good options out there, but also in part because like Dylan Raiola has a little bit to prove.
Yeah, Sam Levitt, who you brought up from Arizona State, is also another intriguing option. The things that I was hearing when his name initially popped, like it was going to be, oh, Texas Tech, like lock it in, you know what I mean? And now it seems like it is a little bit more wide open for Sam Levitt as far as his options. It also says something about the transition at Arizona State, right? Raleek Brown, Jordan Tyson also going to the NFL draft. It's a situation where, for Sam Levitt, if he were to stay at Arizona State, what team would he be coming back to? Would it have the same things around him? And again, it was another lost season for Levitt. I shouldn't say another. It was a lost season, I should say, for Sam Levitt, Arizona State, when he goes out with that season-ending injury. So it's interesting. If Kenny Dillingham is to stay, as we just talked about in the last segment with Brandon Marcello, that's an open question as well. If Michigan comes a calling, there's just so much in flux right now at Arizona State, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember talking to Sam Levitt's brother shortly after that story initially broke contain, and he said there's a lot of dominoes left to fall, and it seems like they've fallen. I mean, Chris Cartman over at Arizona State side at 24/7 Sports reported what happened at the team banquet where Sam Levitt was the only captain not to attend, and Kenny Dillingham essentially said, "I wish Sam Levitt well, and whatever his future may hold." It's kind of ominous, right? So I think the cat's kind of out of the bag there, but Sam Levitt is certainly a person that has a decision to make. I think Arizona State would like him back. Like, it would be good for Arizona State and maybe good for his development, given what Kenny Dillingham has done for quarterbacks. At the same time, like, Arizona State is a school that's not even taking the full rev share. I believe they're at around 18 million instead of like 20.5. Like, Sam Levitt on the open market is going to command a significant amount of money. We're talking 3 million plus most likely. Although, in all fairness, I think teams really do have questions about Sam Levitt's injury and what that means moving forward. It's kind of like the Carson Beck situation a year ago, and he ended up at Miami. But it's a circumstance for Arizona State that's difficult because he would essentially command what, like 20% of your rev share allotment for the year. That's a significant amount of money to put into a quarterback when you have to fill a roster out around him. And it's not like the NFL where you only have to get 53 players. You have to get 85 scholarship players on that roster. So that's a difficult proposition for Arizona State. And I just think it means we're very likely heading towards a divorce and Sam Levitt playing his final season elsewhere.
When we come back on the College Football Insiders, we're going to keep talking about transfer portal quarterbacks. Welcome back to College Football Insiders. We're talking transfer portal quarterbacks, excuse me, as that race heats up for where these dominoes are going to fall and where these quarterbacks are going to end up when the portal opens on January 2nd. Chris, let's talk a little Aiden Childs and Michigan State. Look, it's just a situation where Aiden Childs had all the potential in the world, and it just didn't work out for Michigan State. And a lot of that obviously came crashing down. Jonathan Smith's out of the job, and a lot of guys are leaving that program. Childs, as far as I understand it, there are some questions kind of about his mechanics and about that potentially lead to his inconsistencies as a quarterback or led to his inconsistencies as a quarterback at Michigan State. Ended up getting benched this season at Michigan State as well. So it has been something of a lost career so far for Aiden Childs, even though it started with so much potential. Where do we think this goes from here with Childs?
Well, I mean, as you said, Aiden Childs is somebody with really elite potential. Like, at the end of the day, like, this is a guy that if he puts it all together is going to be a potential day one or day two draft pick. It hasn't really worked out the way I think many of us thought he would. I mean, I think we had him as a top five transfer quarterback just 2 cycles ago when he went to Michigan State with Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. And I didn't think he played all that bad this year. He wasn't elite, but he wasn't the reason Michigan State was losing all of those games. And just talking to people around kind of the Power Four, I think he's still a guy that teams are going to be very interested in if a team sees the right thing in him and they find the right fit. Like, this is somebody that could be not one of those like tier one starters that we're talking about a lot of, your Dylan Raiolas, your Brendan Sorsby's, your Drew Mastermakers of the world, but somebody on tier two, where if he goes to the right team, you can find immense value in Aiden Childs. And that is an important thing in the cycle to remember. Like, we're focusing on all these high level quarterbacks, but there are some quarterbacks, if you put them in the right situation, can really see their careers take off. And I mean, we talked about one earlier in Brendan Sorsby. He wasn't benched in Indiana, but like, he was their starter at the end of the year as a redshirt freshman, was just okay. He went to Cincinnati and emerged as one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So I'm definitely not ruling it out for Aiden Childs either. I think if you find the right fit for him, he could really thrive.
Chris, Darren Mensah at Duke, we'll see if he ends up going back in the portal again after the way that he left Tulane to get to Duke. ACC champion, got Duke to that honor this season. is this a situation where Mentz is just kind of agitating for more money at Duke, or do you think there's actual reality to a concern that he may go in the portal?
Well, I mean, our John Talty reported the other day that Darian Mensah is either going to stay at Duke or go to the draft. I think there was some consternation that Mensah could end up in the portal, and I think that's why John's report was so important because I think he was getting shopped a little bit by his representation. But that's just also reality this time of year. Darian Mensah is one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the FBS. Like John and I reported last year, he makes around $4 million a year with incentives. So he's certainly well taken care of at Duke. But I think the real risk for Duke is like if he decides to go in the draft, this is a really like pedestrian draft class at quarterback. That's kind of shaping up to happen. We'll see what happens with the Ty Simpson. We'll see what happens with the Dante Moore. But if Dante doesn't go in, like the group behind Fernando Mendoza has got a lot of question marks. So if you're Darian Mensah and you are exploring the draft, like you might have more of an opportunity this year than you do next year with a much stronger crop of quarterbacks expected to kind of be at the top of the draft board. So that I think is what he's most considering right now.
Yeah, Chris. And then you had a great report on this. DJ Lagway intending to enter the portal. That's a situation where he came in, got handed the keys to Florida's program. It didn't work out so well. Billy Napier is out of the job. And, you thought that maybe, well, John Summerall would keep him. Buster Faulkner, even though Buster Faulkner's offense at Georgia Tech was something that was really quarterback run centric, to my understanding, that it doesn't necessarily have to be. And that offense was more catered to Haynes King's ability. So you thought that if Florida was going to be pushing the ball around, you may want to keep DJ Lagway around, and that Lagway, with a full offseason, this offseason, may be able to take a step forward after something of a lost, honestly, almost calendar year because of the injuries, as we reported at CBSSports.com earlier this season. But Lagway is, in the end, on the outs, and he'll be leaving Florida and heading into the portal, which is something that, surprised but not shocked, I think, overall, when you really lump all the things together that Lagway was dealing with and you combine that with a new coaching staff, Chris.
Yeah, I won't lie. I'm not often surprised by portal entries, but I was surprised by DJ Lagway. 4 or 5 days before that, he was staying at Florida. That was his intention. I don't necessarily think DJ wanted to leave Florida, even with the coaching change. That's just talking to sources around DJ and around that program. But I've heard the initial meeting between John Summerall and DJ did not go particularly well. I don't think DJ heard what he wanted to hear in terms of like how he would be developed and a plan for that. And it led to him thinking that a fresh start was the thing that made the most sense for him. So I think that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. Like, as you said, Richard, it was kind of a lost season. Like, he barely threw this summer. He was thrust in a really difficult position where he was trying to get back into throwing shape while playing a really difficult schedule. And it just kind of didn't work for Florida this year. I still think DJ's a very interesting prospect. I've said this a couple times. I think he still has #1 overall draft pick potential, but he's also a bit of a risk for teams as they explore in the portal because you don't know if you're going to get the freshman year DJ Lagway who shows such promise, or you're going to get the DJ Lagway we saw this year. I would bet on the former. I think he gets his mechanics in order and it looks a lot different. But I think for Florida, Richard, I don't know if you agree, this is a situation where you probably save a little bit of money at QB1. I'm thinking of somebody like an Aaron Philo coming over from Georgia Tech as a strong possibility for Florida. He was with Buster Faulkner there and has shown some really bright spots and bright moments subbing in for Haynes King. So it'll be interesting to see how both sides kind of handle that split.
Yeah, I agree. Philo is definitely going to be one of the top options for Florida, but I don't think that precludes them from taking another quarterback. I mean, it may take two guys and have a competition going in to the summer. Now, a lot of times that doesn't happen because guys want to come in and be the bona fide starter, but not so sure Philo's experience of what he's put on tape guarantees him, for instance, a starting spot. I think there's a lot of people in the Florida sphere that take a look at a Colton Joseph from Old Dominion, who played last night against USF, I should say, and you wonder, could he be an option as well? And speaking of that USF team, quickly, Chris, I want to talk about Byron Brown a little bit because it's not necessarily a slam dunk that Byron Brown leaves USF, but it is very much up in the air right now with Alex Golesh leaving to go to Auburn, and what Byron Brown's going to do. Would Brian Hartline and the people who are coming in from Ohio State, would they want to keep him? Tim Beck in from Coastal as offensive coordinator. There's a lot up in the air in Tampa as well regarding that quarterback situation.
Absolutely. I know South Florida and Brian Hartline and his staff would very much like to keep Byron Brown around, but I it'll be interesting if they can, because there's certainly, I think, some momentum and people in the industry that point to Byron Brown as a guy who could enter the portal and follow Alex Golesh to Auburn, which makes sense if you consider that Alex Golesh doesn't have a proven answer at quarterback, and Byron Brown had so much success in his career under Alex Golesh. But I know South Florida is working very hard to try to maintain Byron Brown right now, working hard to get a number and a situation in front of him that makes the most sense. But if he did go in the portal, I think Auburn would be a pretty clear favorite. And it would answer some questions for Auburn that Auburn still has a quarterback.
When we come back on College Football Insiders, we're going to do some late coaching carousel updates and a little bit of preview of the college football playoff. Welcome back to College Football Insiders. Chris, look, the coaching carousel has not stopped. We talked about Michigan early in the show as far as the dominoes are going to go there, but there are plenty of staffs in the college football playoff that have their own dominoes to settle as far as coaching staffs are concerned. Obviously, Ole Miss is the big one, but they host that Tulane team. John Summerall and some staffers will be heading to Florida whenever Tulane's run ends in the college football playoff. But it's Ole Miss, obviously, that has the most intrigue because of Lane Kiffin's season long, it seemed like, will he or won't he, that ended with him going to LSU and then deciding that he wanted to bring some of the offensive staff members with him. And then some of those staff members that are planning to go to LSU are staying with Ole Miss for the playoff run. I believe it's 5 in total. So it's just a very, very interesting dynamic with this. And then we got some more intrigue earlier this week where it got reported that Pete Golding is expected to hire LSU interim head coach Frank Wilson to the Ole Miss staff after LSU's bowl game. So there's something of a job change, foreign exchange program going on with Oxford and Baton Rouge here, Chris.
Yeah, I think we broke the news that that was going to happen, and obviously Frank Wilson is a pretty significant name in the coaching space, former UTSA head coach. But really, what he's most famous for is being one of the best recruiters of Louisiana and one of the more famous assistant coaches in college football. And it's very interesting to see him headed to Ole Miss, where he's been before, and working with Pete Golding, who was actually his defensive coordinator at UTSA before. So there's a connection there, but really, like, this will be fascinating, right? I think Frank Wilson's kind of main motivation here is he's going to try to go stick it to Lane Kiffin. He's going to go try to take every single Louisiana recruit he can and bring him to Ole Miss. And I think we could really see a running backs coach trade. We've seen these schools trade a lot the last couple of weeks, but like I would certainly keep an eye on Kevin Smith, who's currently Ole Miss's running backs coach with LSU. So there's just so much tying these two programs together right now.
Yeah, it's going to be, I just cannot wait for that game. I think it's week 3 next season. It's both teams' SEC openers when LSU and Ole Miss get together. I think it gets lost in translation. These two teams are rivals. Obviously Ole Miss has a bigger rival on its schedule, and LSU kind of classically doesn't really have a natural rival. But Ole Miss and LSU, a lot of bad blood between them that goes way, way back to black and white highlights before we get to the Lane Kiffin of it all, as we've seen over the last couple months. Also, we mentioned in the last segment, Tim Beck going to USF with Brian Hartline to be something of a steady hand. I think this is a really, really key move for Brian Hartline to make in his first job as a head coach. There's some significant doubt, to be honest with you, about Brian Hartline's readiness for a high-level job right now. But I think you bring in somebody like Tim Beck, who's a steady hand, head coaching experience for Hartline. I think it's a really, really savvy move. And you just say, all right, Tim, you can kind of handle not just the offense, but some of the administrative duties that Brian Hartline will have to do in his new role. Being able to have Tim Beck kind of handle some of those, Chris, I think is really, really good for somebody like Hartline in his first job as a head coach.
Absolutely. And it's also just a familiar move for Brian Hartline. I know Brian Hartline explored several offensive coordinator options, and They were all kind of tied to Ohio State, and Tim Beck's the one he landed on. And I think it's a really smart hire. You get somebody who can kind of show you the ropes as a first-time head coach, somebody who has been a very successful offensive coordinator in his time to work with you as the head coach. And I don't know if Heartland's going to call plays or not, but somebody who knows the lay of the land in Florida, somebody who has done this before as a head coach, sometimes somebody who's done this at a lot of power programs over the year. Like, I think it was a very savvy hire by Brian Hartline at the end of the day.
When we come back on the College Football Insiders, we're going to talk first round college football playoff games. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. All right, Chris, let's take us home on a college football playoff preview real quick. One thing we're going to be talking about on Sunday after the first round games are over.
Well, with apologies to the game themselves, which I feel bad we've barely touched on in College Football Insiders today, I think the thing we're going to be talking about is Kalen DeBoer. Like, it's either Alabama wins convincingly, we can put the Michigan stuff to bed, and Alabama emerges as a different team than they've shown to be the last month and a half, or that conversation around Kalen DeBoer is going to kick into overdrive if they lose against Oklahoma. That's just the reality of the situation. There's only two options here. Like, Alabama's going to beat a team it should, or the Kalen DeBoer stuff is going to get weird. And I think that's going to be very fascinating on Sunday.
Yeah, Chris, just jumping off of that point, I think the coaching dynamic in the college football playoff will be the big story no matter what happens from these results. Obviously, Bob Chesney and John Summerall are moving on if their teams lose in the first round. But the Pete Golding, Lane Kiffin situation we talked about in the last segment, that to me is going to be the dominating story, especially if Ole Miss loses. Because if Ole Miss is upset by Tulane, there's just going to be such a drumbeat about how Lane Kiffin's exit ruined this season, about how they were distracted all season, all that sort of stuff. I can just see that. It'll be unfair that it'll be a referendum of some sort on Pete Golding because he's in a tough situation, but I do think that's going to be the nature of the conversation. We're going to have plenty more conversations on the College Football Insiders moving forward throughout college football playoff season. I'm your host, Richard Johnson, for Chris Hummer. Thanks for joining us on the show.